Either way, I've been in the industry 22 years. I started on the technical side. I was an IT guy. Kind of loved all that good stuff back in the early 90s and trying to get everything together and kind of building from there. And then I moved my career over to the product marketing side. So I spent 10 years at Microsoft doing both kind of systems engineering, doing program management and product management at Microsoft. And then I left there. I've spent some time at Cisco, NVIDIA, Splunk, HP, ExtraHop, a few other places, doing various different roles. Some have been sales and some have been business development. And I'll kind of give you some insights in terms of why I've chosen this career path. But really making the leap from the technical passion side that I had to the product marketing side with the business degree that I had, it's kind of been a good marriage here. So, and it's a very small class, obviously, so I have slides, but really just to facilitate the discussion. So if you guys have any questions along the lines or along the way, we can dump the slides and start whiteboarding if you want. This is totally up to you. It's your time. But really the key that I want to talk about is talking about product management and product marketing. And as I've grown in my career, there's always been this, when you kind of move from the product side, product management side to the product marketing, people are like, what do you guys do over there in the marketing side? Like, what is that thing? You guys make ads and stuff, right? So I'm going to distinguish between product management, product marketing, and actual marketing, like outbound marketing. So there's a little bit of a different take there. So before we get started too, I want to kind of understand what level that we're at in terms of kind of what you guys want to understand. I don't want to be stating some of the obvious stuff. So I'm just curious in terms of, do you guys have any product marketers that you work with today? That's good news, because guess what? There's this joke that says that there's always at least one weirdo on the bus, and if you get on and you can't find him, guess what? You're the weirdo, right? So guess what? You guys are the product marketers in your organization, and you probably don't even know it yet, right? And so I've had that as well, where I was kind of holding both hats of helping on the product side and helping on the marketing side and kind of bringing that together. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to distinguish the roles between, hey, what does product marketing actually do and what does product management do, and then what's the difference there. And then we're going to talk about aligning go-to-market. And this is always kind of a weird, go-to-market, it sounds so silly. It's just this business marketing term, but it's really important, and I'll tell you why that's important. And then lastly, how to partner together, right? And some of these things might seem obvious, some of them aren't so obvious, and especially if you don't have purview into that other side of the house. So I'm curious, are any of you like brand new to the product management field? Yep, okay. Some of you guys have been around 5+ years in the product management world. Okay, give or take. All right, good. That just helps me out a little bit. So let's talk about roles and responsibilities. Again, I want to just make the disclaimer. I'm here representing myself and the 22 years of experience that I have. I'm not here representing HighSpot, ExtraHop, Microsoft, or any of the other dozen of companies I've worked for. So I'm just here to kind of share this with you and kind of give you my experience in terms of what I've seen. So let me ask you a kind of a rhetorical question. Who owns customer experience? Who owns the customer experience? It's a small room, so I'm going to make you guys answer. Anybody? Who owns the customer experience?
You got to be part of the customer experience where they're using the product, and product management is owning it.
Okay, that's good. Okay, in the context of product, okay, product management.
Using the product as opposed to like the before you bought it part.
Okay, good. You see where I'm going with that, right? Well, actually, we both own it, right? Product marketing and product managers. It's this balance that we got to think about when we start to create products. And really, when you think about our core jobs as product managers and product marketers, it's really to create value and communicate that value out to the market. So products creating value, product marketing, we're going to go out and trumpet the horns about it. But also we want to deliver a great customer experience throughout the entire life cycle. And how do we do that? Obviously build compelling products, but more importantly, defining the go-to-market. So you guys can go and build a fantastic product. And I've had this happen in my past when I was on the product side. You put hours of your life, not weeks, years. I mean, you put it all in, you have this great product. You're like, this thing's just going to kick ass in the market. And then you put it out there and nothing happens. What is going on? And that's where the go-to-market piece is really important. So when we balance those two together and have great products with a great go-to-market, it's super important. But what does a kind of a day-to-day look like, right? Well, product management, if you guys are doing this role already, you typically know, hey, you're building the product vision and strategy. You're saying, hey, this is what we want the product to do. This is where we want to take it, right? You define the roadmap. And I'll put a dog ear on that one in a minute because we're going to come back to the roadmap because it's extremely important. And then you manage the product lifecycle in terms of getting it developed and all that other good stuff. And then for us on the other side of the product marketing side, we're actually looking at the messaging and positioning. Well, how do we go communicate the value? Who are we talking to, more importantly? Build that business and go-to-market strategy. Well, what are the markets that we want to go talk to, right? Because if you want to go out there and blanket the world, then guess what? You're not following the 80-20 rule. You're going to waste a lot of time talking to a lot of the wrong people, and I have a few stories on that as well. And then kind of the thing that we're traditionally known for is the marketing, content creation, and the collateral stuff. Hey, you're making a bunch of white papers and stuff like that, but that's really a very, very small portion of our job as well. And then you can kind of see this grab bag under here. This is where we really either, depending if you have product marketing or not, this might fit into your purview right now. You might be running the product launches or be expected to, and sometimes you don't even know it. Market research, customer interviews, competitive research. I really see this as kind of the joint on, that balance there. This is something that we should be partnering and working together, right? But wait a minute. You have marketing in your title. You must be a marketing person. You must go build ads and create all those crazy Twitter ads and all that other stuff. No, we don't. Product marketing is not demand gen. We're not advertisement. We're not brand. We're not corporate marketing at all. When you think about it, here's all the ways that we help communicate that value I mentioned. But from a marketing point of view, we're now going to the folks that deliver the message. And so think about the analogy I always use when I tell folks, when you think about the difference between product marketing and marketing, and even sales falls into this because they're delivering the message as well. I think about these guys as like the artillery guns, right? Let's use a military reference for a second. There's huge artillery guns, the howitzers or whatever, that can just go and shoot all of these really cool, artillery rounds. Our job on this side as product marketing is, number one, to tell all these folks where the targets are. Where should you be aiming that gun? How high, how low, is that the right target, right? And then number two, we generate all the ammunition to put into those pipes. So whether it's competitive information, whether it's a sales deck, whether it's a data sheet at a trade show that you're going to deliver to those folks, we're responsible for synthesizing all of that and giving it to them in a very easy to digest way for those end customers, right? Make sense so far? Any questions? It's pretty straightforward. Good. Yeah? Okay. So when you put all that together, you create the value, communicate the value, and deliver the message. This is what actual alignment looks like, and you'll be surprised how often that does not happen. And one of the reasons it doesn't happen, no matter if you're a large organization that has a product launch process or go-to-market process, what happens is, hey, we created value, throw it over the wall, somebody's catching it on the marketing side, and the marketing guys are like, okay, well, this kind of sounds cool, and let's make up some crazy story that maybe is half truths, have not. Like, hey, it can go and mop your floor. It's like, no, this is a SaaS application. Like, let's tell the market they can do that anyway, right? And then these guys got to go deliver the message. And let me tell you, when you got salespeople that are actually trying to deliver a shit message, like, it's really, they will come in with pitchforks and hunt you down, right? And without getting this all together and understanding how every single piece of this fits together, you get some massive misalignment. So let's talk about aligning that go-to-market and why it's important. So again, you guys have built a fantastic product. Now what? Now what happens? And typically, the product development lifecycle, right? You guys go and build something and say, hey, here's this great product. Give it over. You guys go ship it out in the world. We're on to the next thing. We're on to the vNext or fixing bugs or the hot fix or whatever it might be. We got our schedule and we're going to go do that. And what happens is when they throw those things over the wall, you get this misalignment, right? And let me tell you, I've had this happen so many times. Well, I thought you were doing this. Well, no, I thought you guys were doing that. And when you start, I'm going to just jump back for a second. When you come back to this, sometimes what will happen is they'll say the message or the intent of the product was to do X, Y, and Z. And then these guys are talking about it in a way that says, let me give you a workable example here. Hey, we just created this great data analytics platform that can do all kinds of cool stuff. Awesome. Hey, we're big data for IoT, systems in the cloud, deliver, whatever, right? Pick all the buzzwords you want. And then when these guys are trying to deliver that message, when a salesperson is sitting in a room with their prospect, hey, I got some big data to sell you. How do I buy big data, right? So the point is, when you have this misalignment, these guys think they're trying to talk one message, and these other guys are talking another message, and guess what happens? That's what happens right there. The customer feels like they're just like, well, what are you guys? What are you doing? Who are you? What space do you play in? And you have sales guys trying to close quota, you have marketing guys trying to create content, and product guys just trying to create product. But nobody's really talking about what's the end result. What are we trying to get? And I spent 10 years at Microsoft, like I mentioned, and this was one of the things that stuck with me. I learned it in one of the trainings that they have, many trainings, and I was there during the good old combative days. I was there from 2001 to 2010. It was like a knife fight everywhere you went. And really, conflict stems from misaligned expectations. And let me tell you, not only does this work in your personal life or your professional life, but in your personal life too. Yeah, honey, I thought you were going to throw out the trash. No, I thought you were. Okay, I'll get it done. So once you align those expectations, it's amazing. It's amazing what can happen. It sounds so simple and intuitive, but you'd be surprised how often it's not happening. So how do you achieve this GTM alignment? And of course, there's a lot of different, I'm kind of synthesizing here, but there's a lot of different ways to go about it. But it really boils down to me in these two simple steps. Integrated focus all the way through, and removing friction throughout the entire process. And I'm going to put process in air quotes here because the process can mean different things in different contexts, and I'll give you a working example of that. Now, once you have integrated focus and removing friction all the way through the creating value, product phase, communicating the value, product marketing phase, and delivering the message, the actual go-to-market, again, it's amazing what can happen. Now, let me give you an example of what happens when you don't have that alignment. One job I had just started, it was like July, I think it was. It was a smaller company. And they said, hey, our next big release is coming up. It's like, awesome, all right. It's an enterprise software sale. I'm thinking, okay, 6 to 9 months. By the time we get everything going, kind of standard stuff. All right, when are we launching? November 1st. I'm not good at math, but that's not a lot of time, right? So let's figure out. Okay, now we can do this. I've done launches like this before. Where are your messaging and positioning frameworks? We don't have those. What about your MRDs, marketing requirement docs? We don't have those. PRDs, product requirement docs? We don't have those either. Okay, all right. I'm trying not to have a heart attack, but it's okay. Let's see what happens here. Product specs, no, we don't have those either. How do you find out what's in the product? Well, we look at nightly builds, or we just go talk to the engineers. My head just exploded. Like, what? Like, this is crazy, right? And that's just kind of what happens organically, because it's just like, hey, we're just building this product. We just got to get it going. We're putting all these great features in. We're getting all these customer requests in. We just got to keep shipping product. We'll figure out everything else. And what would happen is they were creating a ton of value. I mean, this product was amazing, right? It was absolutely amazing. But then when it was time to kick over, it's like, hey, marketing, go market, and sales, go sell. There's no product roadmap whatsoever. It was really that whole misalignment. So then marketing was saying a completely different message. By the time the sales folks were actually getting it, they were getting disjointed information as well. So it was like, well, I heard a rumor that said that we're going to have this feature when it didn't actually appear, but then a seller was saying that in a conversation, or multiple salespeople were saying that. And then we were saying, well, marketing was saying, well, it's our impression that we're going to actually have XYZ capabilities. So we're preaching that to the market, and it's completely different. So again, stretching the customer out, right? Well, thank goodness we got that launch done. We made it. We got it. Then we had to get super creative, and I'll talk about some of those things that we had to do from this particular example and some others. We were able to make it happen, but the way we made it happen was getting together with the product team and working hip and hip all the way through. And I want to talk about the product and the product marketing side just because of product school, but the sales piece really plays a big part in that, right? Is there any questions so far? Guys, good to go? All right, so let's talk about how we achieve some of that to get this go-to-market aligned, right? So again, no product roadmap. And this is especially true in a platform sale. So how many of you guys are working on a platform or work for a platform company where you're just a ton of different use cases and you can do all kinds of different things, right? And that's a really tough challenge because without integrated focus, when you're just trying to be everything to everyone, you end up being nothing to no one, right? Because you're going and you're just saying, it's kind of like that whole thing like, hey, what are you selling? Well, what do you need? I got whatever you need. What do you want? Yeah, well, I don't know. Let's see, right? So it goes back and forth and back and forth. And so going and showing up and saying, we know you have this pain point. We have the aspirin to solve that. And then we are also the vitamin to help you get better down the line. That's an easier conversation to have, right? It's very important. So how do you do that? The integrated focus, and again, this is going to sound it's going to sound like common sense, but what's that saying? Common sense isn't so common anymore, right? It's just really picking the use cases that are important to the end customer. What we end up doing, and I say we because product marketing ends up doing this a lot, we look at it from an inside out point of view, and that is completely wrong. You got to look at it from the customer's point of view. You have to. You have to. Because you're going to go and say, look at this great thing I created and it looks so fantastic and it can do this and that and blah, blah, blah. And they're going to say, I'm sure it's great, but I don't care. Just like what's the saying about babies, right? Everybody thinks their baby is the most beautiful in the world, but nobody cares. I've got 2 kids, so I could say that, right? I think my kids are the most wonderful, beautiful thing, but if I go show other people, they're going to be like, can you kid mow my lawn, right? Do they have practical value in my life, right? And so that holds true for any product that you're creating. So really when you identify those use cases, it helps you in multiple different ways. Well, number one, you maximize your product resources and focus. You're not working on some crazy use case. I've had that a couple of times where the engineers say, wow, if we could use the platform to do XYZ analysis, like just some crazy use case that affects 5% of the market, but they want to use that as like the de facto because they love it. They think that's a great use case. But ask yourself this question, is that engineer the buyer and the user of this product? Because they could be the user, but are they the one that's going to cut the check for that product? If not, that's not going to show any value. So you really got to find those use cases that are going to actually help you. Now, the interesting thing is, I'll give you an example at ExtraHop, is we had a platform there when I was there, and it was a data analytics platform. It could do really cool stuff. But the problem is, we didn't focus on key use cases. So our sellers would go in and, hey man, we got this great network analytics data platform that can do X, Y, and Z. And then the customer was trying to map that to an existing schema they had in their head. And they're like, well, I can see the value, but I can't see the practical value for me. So what we did is we pulled that back. We worked with product marketing and product, and we did a survey to all of our sellers. And we said, what are the key use cases you think you use? Or excuse me, you sell, sorry, sellers. What do you think you sell the most? Then we went to our customer base and said, what are the use cases you think you use the most? So those are key words there, right? Key phrases, selling versus using. And guess what? The data came back, there was a misalignment. But there was some overlap. But really what the sellers thought their top bread and butter use case was maybe 10th on the use case, the user use case list. So what it helped us do is realize where we needed to really focus and overlap. And we said, let's pick these 6 key use cases and then start to tease that out a little bit. And what it helped us figure out was, on top of that, as we started to go to market, we said, hey, security is becoming this really interesting use case that we had not even thought of. Like there'd been rumors like, hey, some customers are using it for security and they're doing some other stuff. But as we started to pull out the data, we realized like this is a core use case. And then you look at the addressable market behind that, and we figured out we got to create almost a completely separate business unit here to go focus from a go-to-market, from a sales, from a product marketing. And then we had our operations, IT analytics kind of thing, right? We had performance monitoring and that kind of operations side. So we kind of split the business into two different distinct go-to-market motions because we realized those were two different use cases.
So
Yes.
in this example, was the discovery made in a particular role, or was it a joint effort through the 3 different roles, or what was the best practice around that? The discovery?
Yeah, that's a great.
Owners?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, when we can kind of think about, in this particular case, every company is a little different, but in this particular case, it was really this joint effort across the company. Okay. Sales said, hey, we got to close, we got to reduce our sales cycle. The time when we get an introduction all the way to they cut a check, we got to squeeze that as much as possible, get more efficient. Okay, great. Well, then how do we do that? We bring repeatability into it. So they're not showing up and throwing up, just kind of seeing what's going on, right? So that was one piece. So the sales team really kind of said, hey, we need to figure this out. And then from a marketing point of view, specifically a product marketing point of view, I was looking at it like, how do I focus my content creation? Because I was getting requests from like, hey, I'm going to an oil and gas summit out in Houston next week. Can I get a data sheet? Like you guys just create those like nothing, right? Like can you just create one, right? But then I was like, wait, but is the juice worth the squeeze on that, right? Like how much are we actually going to get out of it? Is my team using their time wisely? So that made me question like, okay, now how do we get repeatability? And the engineers, of course, are always making trade-offs. What do we put in the product versus what do we don't put in the product? How to prioritize a roadmap and all these other things. So I think we all kind of felt the pain a little bit in our own way. And as we started to come together and talk about it, we're like, hey, let's take this approach, right? And it's amazing, again, when you talk to folks and align expectations and say, hey, we want to do this. Here's what each team is going to do in terms of how we get that done. Magic happens. It's really, really cool stuff.
So it was really initiated by the sales team's needs because of quota and such? Yeah,
it kind of was, yeah. Okay. So it was more of, because it was more of like, how do we just get more efficient, overall? Like, because the company was very successful, things are going great, but still like, how do we squeeze out the friction? I'll get there in a second. And it was like, okay, well, I feel this pain. And I was thinking about, and it was so funny, it came up. It's amazing when you get people talking what happens. It came up kind of in a quarterly business review and somebody said, hey, I've been really seeing this from the field. And by the way, be careful if anyone ever says that to you. Oh, the field says who, where, how many? Because it could be one guy in the Northeast district that they had a beer over and they come back to corporate and they say, the field says, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, we got to do everything. And it's just some opinion, right? So be very careful of that, by the way. But hey, the field says this, and I'm like, hey, my team is feeling this, and the product team says, hey, I'm kind of feeling this. So it was like, it was amazing. Now I want to tell you one sidebar story about communication and getting people talking. This is a different company. We had a QBR, and we're all sitting at this table, and they kind of broke out different people from different parts of the organization in these tables just to kind of have a dialogue about different things. And the head of inside sales is sitting there, and it was me, the head of engineering, head of inside sales, I think head of HR, and a few others, just kind of a random kind of grab bag of people. And the head of inside sales says to the head of development, like, man, I feel like you're not sharing stuff with us. Like, we got to know what you guys are doing, and it feels like you're holding all your cards really close to your chest. And it's just not helping me do my job. And this was an amazing moment because the head of engineering just had this completely puzzled look on his face. And he looks over, he goes, I didn't know you cared. Like, I'm not hiding anything. I just had no idea it mattered to you.
It is like a relationship.
It's expectations, right? It's aligning those expectations. Well, because in all fairness, the head of inside sales never set the expectation that they really wanted that. And so the head of engineering is like, I didn't know you even cared. So once we started to get those things out in the open, it was like, all right, now we got roadmap. Now we can use that information in all these different ways and how we talk to the customer and all that other good stuff, right? So kind of going back to this, by the way, did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Maximizes just product resources and market penetration. You got to build a beachhead nowadays, right? You gotta, if you're trying to shoot a BB gun at a tank, are you going to make any headway? No, right? You gotta focus your efforts, right? So that picking these use cases, and it doesn't have to be just one, it could be two, but you know that you're making a thoughtful effort to go after those particular use cases backed by a market, you're going to have the success you want, right? And then of course it drives the roadmap, the GTM, even the sales strategy. How do we go? Do we need an overlay team? Are you guys familiar with what an overlay sales team is? I'll give you an example for security, because that happens all the time. When companies see they're doing, say, XYZ market, let's just use data analytics as another, like Splunk is a perfect example. Actually, I'll use them when I was at Splunk. Splunk goes and gathers all these data log files, right? Brings them together and does some really cool analytics data with it. Well, then all of a sudden, these security guys just fell in love with this because it's all the log files that they had to go chase around, the entire environment. So I brought it in, and they said, hey, there's this great market opportunity. Security's, just red hot. We got to go after this. Well, our sellers aren't really proficient in the lingo of that particular market. So what they did is they created what's called a sales overlay team, which is basically, think about it like the Navy SEALs for security. So if there's a deal in Atlanta and that group is running that deal, they'll bring in a sales overlay person to help them facilitate the conversation throughout that entire sales cycle, right? So when you start to think about some of these use cases, then it helps you be very diligent or very focused and do your due diligence in terms of what it means to all of this. And then it creates repeatable sales plays. So when I go and I create some documentation for the sales team and says, hey, if you hit a security use case and this is the interest they express, here are the things you need to do, and you also need to pick up that bat phone and call your security overlay guy, right, or gal. Make sense? Any questions on that? So when you do that, you get that truly integrated marketing from that perspective. But then there's this little thing called friction, okay? And in this, I found this from NTT data. I just really like their definition. Any aspect of the customer interaction that has a negative impact on customer experience. Now, when you think about, disruption and disruptive is a big, buzzword in our industry or in the startup world and tech world nowadays. But why are those companies disruptive? Slightly rhetorical question, but I'll see who can answer. Anybody can guess? Why are they disruptive? What makes them disruptive? They remove friction from the process. Look at Uber. I don't have to go hail a cab in the middle. I can just call it and it comes to me, right? Think about all these disruptive technologies. They're removing friction from a process to make it easier to solve your problem. Now, that friction exists throughout the entire product development lifecycle and the go-to-market lifecycle as well. So when you start thinking about this friction, well, I recommend you start thinking about this friction in every step of the way as you go down. So according to NTT as well, nearly half of US customers say they've experienced an unsatisfactory interaction with at least one company in the last 12-month period. But where does that unsatisfactory interaction live? So we were talking earlier, is that the product, who owns the customer experience, right? We both do, right? And it's not just in the product development lifecycle, right? Well, I use the software development lifecycle here. So, hey, you're figuring it out, you're designing, implementing, testing, evolving, and then, hey, on to the next version, right? And then on to the next version, and then on to the next version. But there's this other thing in the business and marketing side, and this is really where the customer experience begins. This is the buyer's journey or life cycle. If you ever live or work with the marketing or sales guys, you're going to see this. And I think in my deck that this is actually, I found it from, I'm forgetting the organization's name, but anyway, this is not mine. But this is the typical life cycle, right? They're either aware they have a problem or they're unaware they have a problem. It's kind of like, well, I've always had that aching in my heel. I just never thought there was a problem with it, right? Well, hey, did you know that you could get that fixed and it'd be a lot better? So they want to discover, so either they know they have the pain point or they're discovering that they have it. So they're going to try to find your product, explore it. They want to understand, what does it look like? I want to kind of demo it. I want to kick the tires a little bit. I want to download the app, figure it out, compare, evaluate, purchase, retention, and referrals. And this is important because where do you think the product lifecycle lives in this particular journey? It's heavily ingrained in there. And there's things that happen that we just kind of think about the product, and we created a product, and then we think, okay, then the go-to-market. Well, I just got to give a message to that. But what about these other things? How do I help them explore? Are there ways to demo the product that make it frictionless for them so they have a great experience, right? How about comparing? Do I make it easy to set up a side-by-side comparison, whether or not it's, a simple chart, or is it actual bits and bytes, whatever it might be, evaluation. And the retention is a very important part. I think a lot of organizations don't really think about the retention portion. They're like, hey, we made the sale, we got their money, see you guys later, we're off to the next thing. Well, especially in our subscription economy that we're moving to today, this is becoming more and more critical for these customers to stay loyal and stay on your platform, or guess what? They're churning, they're bouncing, I'll see you later. So having the product development lifecycle as a part of this stage as well is extremely important, because if you do not satisfy any one of these 7 things, guess what happens? They're just like, sorry, man. Like, literally. I mean, you've seen the reviews on Amazon, right? I mean, some of those are hilarious, but some of them, I mean, come on, like, oh, I couldn't find it, or I couldn't do this. It's 1 star, terrible service, or I wouldn't do it again, or whatever, right? Like, I saw this hilarious one that's like, the Uber driver picked me up on his back, and we piggybacked, but his shoulders were too bony, so like 1 star, like, I mean, it's a silly one, but it's, it's just like, come on, man, like, I can't even satisfy you, right? So that's what happens. And so delivering great customer experience is really thinking holistically and getting these 2 things together along the way. I'll give you another example. Having an online demo, and it was just like, it was a great demo because it lived in AWS. This product that I worked on lived in AWS. Anybody could go actually use real working product. Like, this wasn't just some demo environment, like it's full blown, here's the product, right? But the challenge was, it was the full blown product. So some customers would come in and like, I have no idea what I'm looking at. So then we started saying, okay, well, we started seeing demo, the dwell time on the demo start to kind of go down a little bit, right? So marketing, we can kind of see that. So, hey, let's sound the alarm. Hey, what can we do a little bit better? So we started thinking about other ways to solve that problem. And so we looked at it and said, there's this company called WalkMe. Are you guys familiar with WalkMe? Have you guys heard about WalkMe at all? Super cool product, by the way. They basically help you kind of step folks through a web UI or whatever it might be. So you could put up all these different kind of, like click steps or whatever. So the cool thing for us was during this explore and comparison phase, we could actually set up a kind of a demo by your own adventure kind of thing, or just free flow. I just want to go and check it out. And we could say, I want to compare you against XYZ's workflow, and I want to see what that looks like. And all of a sudden, we started seeing dwell time go back up, right? So it's all of these little things like, hey, product is product, but even how you help folks demonstrate and compare. And even when the sales folks are trying to demo it, are you thinking from a product perspective? Have you thought about, well, how easy is it for a salesperson to demo this in an environment with no Wi-Fi and they're in a metal box, right? Like I'm going overboard there. But one time I did go on a sales call with the sales team. And by the way, I recommend that all of you guys do that a lot. You will learn so much. And it's amazing. You just call them up, sales guys, and say, hey, I don't want to talk. I don't want to pitch. I just want to listen. And you listen to that dialogue that happens. You will learn so much from a product perspective. It's amazing. But one time we presented it at a 3-letter acronym in the Washington, D.C. area. And they didn't even let us, like literally just pen and paper. That was it. And it was an online demo that we had. But thank goodness somebody had a VM. They let us take one laptop in. and then we could use it that way. So just these are things you got to think about, and you learn these things when you're out in the field riding along. It's amazing. You just learn so much. I highly recommend it. Don't stay back in HQ all the time. Get your butts out there. So any questions on kind of that delivering that customer experience? Because it's definitely a joint effort. It's a team effort to make sure that every part of this life cycle is hip and hip with product to make sure that it's delivered. I mean, even discover, like when we start thinking about it from a marketing perspective, how do we think about our verbiage that we talk about within a blog post? Is it SEO optimized, right? To make sure we're hitting the right keywords so they can find us. And then once they find us on that blog, are we linking directly to the actual demo so they can start to demo and kick the tires on it, right? Like you got to think about that all the way through. Cool, all right. So how do we successfully partner with product marketing? Some of this is going to be obvious, but some of it won't be. But again, sometimes, common sense isn't common anymore. Sit down with your product marketer. If you don't have a product marketer, like some of you guys said you don't have product marketing, find your sales people and just sit down with them and say, what do you guys see out there? What kind of use cases? Because it'll be amazing. Sometimes you'll find this kind of, what you thought was a kind of niche use case that pops up over and over and over and over again. And more importantly, that might not be something you build into the product per se. It's just some kind of maybe duct tape and baling wire kind of use case. But it's easy for them to talk about. It's easy for them to demo. And it's easy to demonstrate value to the customer. And sometimes maybe you say, okay, we got to get that and pay attention to it from a product perspective. And maybe it might be duct tape and baling wire, but how do we put it together in a way that just looks turnkey, right? So sit down and think about those market opportunities overall. Also the product requirements and the market fit. And then this is important. We, at another company, we were selling these appliances. And well, actually it was kind of a virtual appliance and physical appliance. Well, the physical appliance, the product team was running hard and fast, like, hey, we got to meet these deadlines. And they made some product decisions. From a product perspective, man, it looked great on paper, right? Like, we got all the throughput we need, we got all the performance we need, like this is how we're going to go after it. And then we got it, and we looked at everything else, and we put it through the business machine, and all of a sudden it's like, well, what we actually want to make off of this and how we got to actually price it and license it, our cost is going to be, it's just going to be so high. And it forced us to kind of take a different strategy than having that decision up front and saying, hey, what if we sized it? What kind of trade-offs can we make? So the point is, think about the product decisions and the requirements that you're making and make sure they are a product fit. Because from an engineering and a product perspective, they might be kosher and you're like, let's go for it. But from a market perspective, it could be too expensive, it could be too cheap, it could be too hard to deploy. Like there's a lot of different things, again, during that buyer's journey to think about those things, right? It's super important. And then adapting to new or unique buyer journeys. So sometimes you're going to go and you think about a product and you say, hey, we're probably going to sell to one specific vertical. But what if we want to go sell to a different vertical? Like what if we're doing finance and we want to go to sell to healthcare? Well, those buyer journeys might be different. And even how you talk about the product would be different. For example, in finance, they don't use the term use case. If you go and talk to them about, customer evidence. If you go talk to them about customer evidence, they'll be like, I don't know what that means. We have client testimonials, like, yeah, okay, we want to, to serve that up. So the way you talk about it, the way you skin the product, the way you put it out there, like all of these things matter. It's just kind of thinking through, again, that customer journey and how are they going to actually think about your product in the existing schema that they have today. Because if you don't map to that schema that they have, you're going to spend way too much time educating that market versus selling, closing, and getting product deployed. It's super important. Removing friction. Think about avenues for product discovery and not necessarily discovery of like new features, but like how are customers finding you? Is it just through SEO? Is it through different trade shows, right? Are there different ways to do it? I'll give you an example here. At Splunk, they were genius for doing this. This was pre my time, but I was there when it was in action. They were trying to land a completely novel approach to performance monitoring and security by log aggregation. And I'll tell you a funny story on that. I was here in Seattle before, it was like 2 years before they had gone public. I get a phone call from this headhunter, like, hey, they're opening up this small company in San Francisco is opening up an office in Seattle, and like to see if you're interested. And I go, what do they do? He goes, I don't know, they do something with log files. And I was like, that sounds stupid. Like, I don't want to do anything with that. Come to find out, it was like the best thing ever. And I ended up going back there later on. But the point is, they had to go and educate a market. And what they did, instead of trying to pull folks in, they went to the people, right? They did these things called Splunk Lives. And it's basically a mini trade show just focused on Splunk. But what it did was it was great from not only a product education perspective, but also from a sales perspective. What they would do is they would put on these little events, and they would invite all these people to come in. And they would get, so basically the format was this. The regional sales director would get up and thank everybody for coming. And then they would have a keynote speaker from Splunk Corporate. So I did that a couple of times and come up and say, hey, I'm Isaac, and I'm going to talk to you about Splunk and why it's great. And then a local sales engineer would do the demo. So then he'd recognize everybody in his patch, right? But then after that, we were done pitching. We would have customers go up, just talk about use cases. Hey, we're doing this, and we're doing that, and this is so great. And so all of these new people sitting in the audience are discovering this product in a whole different way that they didn't even have to go to Google, right? And then the afternoon was all about breakout sessions on specific use cases, like you're going to use it for security or IT ops, or let me tell you how to write an SPL query and do these different things. So the way they did that, they found a way for customers to discover the product in a completely new way, and that cut that education time down. It was a genius move. I thought it was really cool. Another way is thinking about product packaging and pricing. How many times have you gone to a website or bought enterprise software and it's like, oh yeah, we got 15 different SKUs and kind of windows. We got home edition, premium edition, this edition, that edition. Like, well, which one do I get, right? Again, that's causing frictions, causing confusion. Hey, we should package it in a simple way. We should price it in a simple way, right? It's a good, better, best model. There's a lot of different things that can be done there. And this is definitely something to partner on that's super, super important. I already mentioned product demos. Even the distribution strategy, you guys should think about it, because again, how you distribute the product could have impacts in terms of how it's installed, how it's deployed. There's a lot of different things. If you have partners, and partners are trying to demo it on top of that, and they have a certain way to do it, right? Stuff like that. And even deployment and adoption models are important. I went back to the retention piece, especially if you're doing a land and expand model and you're trying to find that beachhead. How do you make the product easily deployable to others in the organization so they can see the value, and then you can expand use cases from there, right? And those are super important things. I think a lot of, again, product says, oh, hey, we're just going to do this one thing and try to repeat it over and over. But sometimes an expansion model looks a little bit different than the initial beachhead deployment model. So just sitting down with your product manager or your salespeople and having these kind of conversations and thinking through every single step of the buyer's journey, super, super important. Yes, ma'am.
Were you involved in pricing directly as a product marketer? Like sometimes it seems to fall in product management.
Oh, that's a great question. So just for the sake of the camera, how many times was I involved with pricing? That's a really interesting one. It was a lot. Personally, I was involved in a lot of those conversations. And it all depends organization by organization, right? If that's a product management function or a product marketing function, it all depends. But having the seat at the table to talk about these things, to say, well, how are we thinking about it from a buyer's journey perspective? How are we thinking about it from an outbound perspective? How is it going to land? And so sometimes just having the opinion in there was key. Sometimes like, hey, we're coming out with a brand new product. We need you to build the model from ground up and get it vetted and have everybody else involved and have finance and sales and everybody else involved in that. So it really depends on ownership. It all depends on the organization and how they have it structured. In fact, there's some companies that have product marketing that lives under the product organization, and others have it living in marketing. So it all depends on that balance of how much it is of creating, the creating value versus communicating it, and it all depends. But for me personally, I've been highly involved in a lot of those conversations when you start to think about how to price and license and package from there. You know, this one, again, it's a little straightforward, but just keeping tabs, you know, ensure that those expectations are aligned and they stay aligned, right? And talking about these two particular areas, like, hey, have, you know, whether it's weekly or every other week one-on-ones, and just say, hey, let's talk about our integrated focus. Are we still aligned? Do you think there's anything that could alter that focus from both a business perspective and a technology perspective? Is there a new competitor that's doing something that, you know, hey, we got to start thinking about this and start to think about maybe we alter our focus? Are there areas, how are they doing, keeping tabs and measuring success, all that other good stuff? And then removing the friction, right? Just asking these simple questions. Hey, is it still easy to find? Is it easy to evaluate? Is it easy for our sales team to sell? Sometimes we don't even think about that. We just say, hey, that's sales problem, right? But what's the line from Silicon Valley where he's like, well, Richard, we only pull in the best sellers, and you know, and he's like, well, no, we got to make it easy to sell, or else they're going to leave. Like they won't sell it, right? Like, well, they're supposed to be the best sellers. Like, no, they're just like anybody else. They want the easy friction, you know, kind of low hanging fruit. So we got to always think about them as well. And can customers easily renew the product as well, right? Have you built-in mechanisms to help do that? All right. So to recap, talking about integrated focus, removing friction to get that integrated go-to-market all the way through. And if you do that, you're going to have consistent, great customer experiences from a marketing and a business and a product point of view, right? And this, I love this quote. I can't take credit for it. It's actually, I heard it from CEB. They're kind of a business analyst kind of corporation. They just got bought by Gartner. But they do this thing called the challenger sale. It's called the challenger sales model. And the whole point is it's about building constructive tension with prospects and helping them be, and you're more of a consultant along the way versus being a seller and trying to push something down. And what they say is really change happens when the pain of same is greater than the pain of change. Because you're going to try to make a prospect or customer change the way they do something, whether it's their workflow, you know, whether it's the way they buy, whatever it is. You've got to set it up and make it just drop dead simple, and that's when they'll start to change, right? And that change happens really between product management and product marketing. So it's up to us to make that happen. So with that, thank you. And all right, well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you coming. Yeah.